Welcome to the presentation for DA8 Examinations Techniques. To present, I'm Velena Skangwa. DA8 is Financial Reporting, which is a paper at level 2 of the Diploma in Accountancy program. Zika has discovered that a lot of students don't perform very well in this paper, and they have decided to organize for this particular recording and presentation of the examinations techniques. To start with, I wish to state what examinations techniques are. Examinations techniques are everything that you need to know and you need to avoid as a candidate that is preparing for this particular paper. We are going to go through them, and this will be something that will help you to improve your performance in this particular paper. To begin with, let me talk about the paper format. DA8 has got two sections, the section A and section B. In section A of this paper, you get two compulsory questions. These questions will usually come from predictable syllabus areas. One will come from the group financial statements, another one will come from single entity company accounts. They are predictable, and so whatever the hints that I'm going to give you here, if you follow them, you will be able to improve your performance from this particular section. Section B will comprise of three non-compulsory questions from which you have to choose two. The exam duration for this paper is 180 minutes. This means that you need to spend not more than 1.8 minutes for every 1 mark from each question. For example, if you are attempting a question that has 10 marks, you cannot spend more than 18 minutes on that particular question. If you are attempting a question that has got 5 marks, you don't need to spend more than 9 minutes on it. So it's very important you follow this, and you will avoid a situation where you overspend your time in the exam on one particular question, disadvantaging yourself with other questions that are extremely important. The key syllabus topic areas for this particular paper are 4. The first one talks about conceptual and regulatory framework. This one is purely a theory topic, which should be something that is very affordable for any student, even those that are doing self-study, to be very comfortable with. The weighting for this particular section is only 10%. So what it means is that you don't have a lot of questions that will come from this area in the exam. And whenever you get these questions, they are basically the same questions. They will not vary too much from one sitting to the other. It is basically the same questions that may be asked time and again. The other syllabus area is on single entity financial statements. Single entity financial statements require the preparation of financial statements, but these, they have all sorts of accounting standards that come with the area. In fact, this is one problematic area for a lot of students because the standards that are incorporated, this is what gives a lot of students a lot of problems in the exam. The other category is financial analysis, which covers about 20% in terms of the weighting. Then we have the group financial statements that are at 25%, which is some good amount of work also that you need to do. So the majority of the marks that you need to get in this particular paper will come from the single entity financial statements, the group financial statements, as well as the financial analysis. Together, this is 80% in terms of the weighting from the syllabus. So you cannot afford preparing for this exam without adequately understanding the 3 areas of financial analysis, single entity, company accounts, and the group financial statements. The last category is on financial statements pertaining to public sector accounting. It is a small percentage, which is 10%. And again, from this particular area, you tend to get few theory questions asking you, for example, about many objectives of public sector accounting and probably the difference between public sector accounting and private sector accounting. So you don't tend to get a lot of wide-ranging questions from this particular area. That's why it is carrying only a 10% of the total syllabus weighting. For adequate exam preparation, I wish to remind the candidates that sit for this particular paper of a few things. First of all, avoid hand-picking the topics that you cover as you prepare for this particular exam, meaning that you need to go through everything that is contained in this particular syllabus. By hand-picking, you disadvantage yourself, especially when it comes to Section C of this particular exam, because in Section C, you cannot predict which standard the examiner is going to include in there. Questions will come from across the syllabus, and it is accounting standards based. So you cannot say, I will study IFRS 16 and I will leave out IFRS 15, for example, because the question in Section B can come from any standard, and leaving out any one of them will disadvantage you in terms of your marks that you'll be able to obtain from that particular section. Another important factor as you prepare for the exam is that you need to carry out what we call question practice. You know, do a lot of question practice under exam conditions. What do we mean when we say question practice under exam conditions? We are talking about you getting, for example, a past question paper. Pick this particular question. If it is a 20 marks question, multiply the 20 marks by 1.8 minutes. Okay? So that you establish how much time you need to spend attempting this particular question. By doing so, you tend to improve your writing speed, your efficiency with which you write in the exam, because you could have attempted your questions, you could have done your revision under these exam conditions. When you don't do this, there is a danger of one thing. What is this danger? The danger is that when you go to the exam not having attempted questions under exam conditions, you are likely to spend unnecessarily too much time on a particular question which has lower marks than the total number of minutes that under normal circumstances you need to actually spend on this particular question. So when you make it a habit, every time you are revising, check how many marks the question you are revising contains. Multiply that by 1.8 minutes. That gives you the time within which you need to be complete and be done with this particular question, so that you leave yourself enough time for other questions. The next thing that you need to do as you are preparing for this exam is to make sure that the order with which you are going to answer the questions is starting with those that are the easiest questions to you. So as an individual, evaluate yourself when you're in that exam room. Look at which question is the easiest for me in this whole paper. Start with that particular question. When you start with the easiest question of all, you will not spend unnecessarily too much time on it. That will give you enough time to leave for other questions. If you do not evaluate according to you which question is the easiest, and maybe you start with the most difficult question, you will find yourself spending almost half the time in the exam on one particular question. This is very dangerous in the sense that it will actually lead you to having spent too much time on maybe one question, but because it was very difficult, you will waste a lot of time that will disadvantage you with the time that you are supposed to spend on other questions. So very important, I emphasize that you start with the question that you think is the easiest. It doesn't matter whether this is question 4, it is question 5, it's question 3. You can actually start with question 5 as long as you correctly label it as question 5. That's what is important. Another important thing that you need to do as you prepare for this exam, the Zambia Institute of Chartered Accountants has a website. On this website, there are what we call examiners' reports. The examiners' reports are actually reports that have been prepared by a team of examiners for each paper, and this report contains information about the past exam and how students performed in that particular past exam. So if there were certain weaknesses that were discovered from the students in the previous exam on which those reports are based, this is going to be highlighted, the challenges that the students had, and these examiners will tend to provide highlights as to what these particular candidates were expected to do if they were to perform better in that particular paper at that particular sitting. So if you are a future candidate for this paper, by going through a lot of these examiners' reports, you will learn about your colleagues' mistakes and how the examiners felt your colleagues should have actually performed, which will give you an advantage of knowing the mistakes and the corrective action that is actually required. So examiner reports are very important for you to go through. Another important thing is that as you are preparing for this paper's exam, do not just use any textbook that says financial reporting. May you endeavor to invest your time and energies by making reference to manuals and revision kits that are most recent, the latest that Zika has published. By so doing, you avoid a situation where, accounting evolves with time. There are changes that happen to accounting standards. And if you are using old textbooks, you are likely to find yourself in a situation where you have actually studied an old standard where a lot of changes have taken place and you will not be privy to these particular changes. What Zika does, the Zambia Institute of Chartered Accountants, they normally include in the students' magazine technical articles. Okay? So if a particular standard has changed and it is not incorporated in their study manuals, you expect to actually find this information in the Students' Accountant magazine. So make it a habit to actually go through the Student Accountant magazine, the technical articles section of the magazine. It will always bring about information on the new standards and the changes to existing standards that may require to be applicable to the exam at a particular sitting. Okay? The other thing that we need to be aware of as we are preparing for this particular paper, DA8, is the 15 minutes reading time. How is a student supposed to use that particular time? 15 minutes reading time is actually outside the 3 hours writing time. So how effectively may a candidate use the 15 minutes? Because in that 15 minutes, the question paper is already with you. And so what are you supposed to do? So first of all, make sure you have read through all the questions using the 15 minutes. After reading through all the questions, Can you select the section B questions that you think you are going to attempt? Okay, so section B will have 3 questions from which you need to pick 2. The 15 minutes time should be used to select which 2 of the 3 questions you are actually going to answer. When you have selected those 2 questions, that is not enough. Can you also make sure that you number the 2 questions in the order that you think you can answer them? And this order should be determined by how you think one question is easier than the other to you. So if I think that question 3 is easier than question 5 that I'm opting for, then I must label question 3 1, question 5 2. When you do that, you avoid the pressure of trying to choose which question to answer next after the compulsory questions during the writing time. You could have saved yourself a lot of time. So go through the questions, read them thoroughly, understand the content, making sure that, depending on your level of preparedness, one question is the easiest compared to the other, and you start with the easiest question. By doing so, you actually avoid unnecessarily too long period of time spent on a particular question. So very, very, very important. The next thing I'm talking about are the general competencies that you require for this particular DA8 paper. There are actually 5 main areas of this particular syllabus. The first one is the regulatory framework, as well as conceptual framework. This area is one area that when there's a question in the exam, you cannot afford not to go for a question on this particular area. Many times it is the easiest question that you ever get in section B. Other questions, they involve you calculating and interpreting international accounting standards. But if you get a question on conceptual framework, it's a purely theory and a straightforward theory, like qualitative characteristics of financial information. Okay, these things you learn them from level 1 of your studies up to this final level. And so many times they are the easiest part of this particular paper. You cannot afford to leave out any question that is based on conceptual and regulatory framework. It is because of the straightforwardness of this particular syllabus area that a lot of lecturers actually may not formally even teach this topic in class. But that should not be an excuse for you as a student. You need to make sure you have read through this particular chapter and, maximize on it if at all you get a question in the exam. There will never be a complicated question coming from this particular area. The next general competence that you need to achieve at the end of your study for this particular paper is the preparation of single entity financial statements. I wish to confess here that this is one area that is very problematic to students that sit for this paper. In fact, if there's a question that would have the lowest marks from the students, is any question on a single entity financial statements. Why is it so? It has been observed over time that candidates that sit for this particular paper do not go deeper to understanding the individual accounting standards. They do go through many other things, preparing cash flows, preparing group financial statements that everyone else finds easier. But when it comes to single entity, it has forever been a challenge for candidates to adequately articulate and incorporate the individual accounting standards that come as adjustments to this particular topic. So I'm here to remind each one of you that this area is not an area that can never be one of those where candidates are performing better. it is up to you to make a choice. You know that if a particular area gives you problems, one secret, get a lot of questions on this particular area, 6 questions, 7 questions, try them out under exam timed conditions. You will never be the same. So find out through the question practice how best you can improve on this particular area. In addition, make sure that you actually go through your accounting standards thoroughly, making sure that you understand them in terms of the general principles for recognition, for measurement, for derecognition, for remeasurement in subsequent years. What is the guidance from these individual accounting standards as to how you measure the elements in subsequent years? That should be enough to help you improve on your performance in this particular area. Another area where you need to be very comfortable with is actually on interpretation of ratios. Interpretation of ratios is not only stating that a ratio has improved and hence good performance, or it has gone down, poor performance. That is not interpretation. You actually get 0 marks. When you have calculated the ratios, could you kindly relate the ratios that you have calculated for the current year to the background information, what activities have taken place in the current year, and what activities may have taken place or may not have taken place in the previous accounting period? So assuming you're looking at one particular company and comparing its performance previous year and the current year, let's assume the question tells you that this particular entity has stopped producing its own goods and they have engaged an external supplier, so they are outsourcing their production. And then when you look at the ratios that you have calculated, there is an improvement in gross profit margin, okay? There is also an improvement in operating profit margin. And maybe in the background information, you are also told in the previous year there was no disposal of non-current assets, but in the current year the company has actually disposed of some non-current assets, okay? So what does that entail for the interpretation of your ratios that you get in terms of the gross profit margin, operating profit margin, and return on capital employed? So let's assume the return on capital employed has improved. Operating profit margin has improved. Gross profit margin has improved. It will be very wrong for you to say, gross profit margin has increased, hence good performance, and you put a full stop, you have interpreted. That is not interpretation. If you say return on capital employed has increased, hence good performance, I wish to remind you that is not interpretation, okay? Interpretation is when you say, for example, that gross profit margin has increased this year compared to last year because probably it is cheaper for this particular organization to outsource the production than when it is doing its own production. And when they outsource, they will cut down on a lot of operational expenses. Maybe some staff will not need to be within this particular organization. And so the wages and salaries will go down and hence improving the operating profit itself. When you connect even the improvement in operating profit margin to actually the outsourcing of the production activity, then you are interpreting, okay? When it comes to return on capital employed, we know quite all right that when there's improvement in operating profit, most likely it will spill over to improvement in return on capital employed. So as you interpret your return on capital employed, you cannot afford to leave out the fact that, you know, it may have been an improvement due to improvement in profitability, or you cannot afford to leave out the fact that due to the disposal of the non-current assets, which reduced the denominator of the ratio. Again, this may have led to the increase in the return on capital employed. So when you make the connection of the relationships between activities and the ratios that you are calculating, then you are interpreting the financial performance, and not just to say it increased, hence good, it reduced, then hence poor performance. That is not enough of what we call interpretation. So make sure that you can do the correct thing on this particular area where you need to have the competence. Okay? The other area of the competence is the preparation of group financial statements. On this particular one, we don't have a lot of serious challenges. If anything, it's one area where candidates do a very good performance at each and every sitting. I will highlight a few things later, but otherwise it's not a problematic area. Then the area to do with public sector entities, you get purely theory questions. Theory. So make sure that you can be comfortable with that particular theory part of the syllabus. What are the common command words that are used in this paper? So it is one thing to actually understand the question, and it is another thing to actually answer the question. So if you are going to misunderstand the question, automatically your answer is off target. So common command words in DA8, those from Bloom's taxonomy. The first level, which is about remembering, this requires you to just identify, to define, to write about something briefly. Okay? You don't get a lot of questions that have these command words at this level because DA8 is at level 2. And so there will be very few occasions when you're asked to define something, to define adjusting event or define non-adjusting event. When you're asked that, you just need to make something clear. State what you know about it. It's a remembering stage of Bloom's taxonomy. The second stage is understanding, and you get a lot of questions from the understanding level, where you're asked to discuss, explain the accounting treatment, and show how they should be presented in financial statements extracts. So for you to explain, you need to understand the principles of a given accounting standard. What are the rules regarding measurement, regarding initial recognition, regarding subsequent years recognition, regarding derecognition? It's only when you understand the principles of a given accounting standard that you'll be able to actually do the discussion, the explanation of a given accounting treatment for a particular short scenario. The third level is application. When you are actually asked to produce financial statements or compute the figures to go to the financial statements, you are required to apply your knowledge from remembering, your understanding, and then do the computation and then presentation in these financial statements.
Take your career prospects to the next level with Zika.
Our diploma in accountancy is an essential qualification if you're planning on entering the accounting profession.
The Zika tax program at both certificate and diploma level equips you with an enhanced understanding of the field of taxation.
Our diploma in public sector financial management is ideal for accountants or trainee accountants working in the public sector.
And CA Zambia, a respected designation designed to ensure that graduates are highly trained to hold senior positions in the workplace.
You can study through flexible options like self-study as well as part-time or full-time through our accredited tuition providers.
Zika sponsors the top CA Zambia graduate to the One Young World Summit for Young Leaders and also offers scholarships to the top university accountancy graduates from recognized universities.
Visit zika.co.zm now for more information or find us on Facebook and LinkedIn.
Don't delay, your future awaits.
So a lot of questions in this paper will come from level 2, which is understanding as well as the application. Okay? In very few cases, you may have something coming from, analyzing, evaluating, and creating, which are the last 3 levels of Bloom's taxonomy. So when you're asked to analyze financial statements or interpret, okay, or recommend which particular entity between A and B should be bought by company C, you are actually using high levels of understanding from Bloom's taxonomy, but you do get these command words in some of the questions that will come to you. The next thing is the highly examined standards that you need to be aware of, which are very common in this particular exam. Those that are related to non-current assets: IS 16, property, plant and equipment; IS 38, intangible assets; IS 36, impairment of assets. You cannot afford to go to this exam without your clear understanding of these particular standards. IS 23, borrowing costs. Just in the 2019 June exam, you had IS 23, IS 40, IS 16 within one city. So out of all the non-current assets, only one did not feature. So the non-current asset related standards are not any area that you should play around and, you know, leave them out in your quest to prepare for this particular exam. Leases, IFRS 16, very common in this particular paper, especially the single entity company accounts questions. Can you make sure that you are comfortable with this particular standard? How do you get the finance cost? How do you depreciate the leased asset? How do you calculate your non-current liability portion, the current liability portion? Okay? Many are at times that people may know the process, but they end up with wrong figures because they don't pay attention to the year when the lease agreement is entered into. So pay attention to the dates. In accounting, dates are extremely important. From the reporting of financial performance, you have a variety of these standards: IS 33, 21, 20, 10, 8, 2, 41, as well as 15. A variety of them. Make sure that you have gone through these, or else you will be going in that exam ill-prepared. So you can't afford to miss out on these particular standards. Income taxes, extremely important, and all the financial statements that pertain to groups. Okay? Financial statements, accounting standards relating to groups, they are extremely important. The IS 27 there, the IFRS 13, IFRS 10, IFRS 3. These are extremely important if you are going to achieve good performance in the group financial statements. Some of the common mistakes that candidates that go for this paper make include, of course, just inadequate preparation. So you have gone through some standards and you haven't gone through some. So when you go to this exam and then you come across the standards you have not studied, already that is putting you at a disadvantage, a serious one. Lack of practice under exam conditions is another very serious mistake. If you have never taken time to sit down and get past exam questions to attempt under exam conditions, I can assure you, you are going to struggle in this particular exam, especially for topics that give you problems. Endeavor to look for more questions on this particular topic, do the practice, and make sure that you time yourself using the 1.8 minutes per mark. So depending on the marks that that particular question has, you give yourself that time. Then not paying attention to the command words. There are times you get a question that says list and explain. And then all you do is list. For example, if a question says list and explain the qualitative characteristics of financial information, and all you do is to provide a list, already you could have donated half of those marks for that particular question, even more than half. So pay attention to the command words in a question and make sure you address all of them. Then you'll be successful in this particular exam. On the timing during an examination, you need not spend too much time on any single question. you need to make sure that you have allocated appropriate time and you don't go beyond that particular time. So it is very helpful. Like if your answering is commencing from question 1 and you are starting that question 1 at 9:15, label that you need to stop at 10 hours. So whether you have completed question 1 at 10 hours or not, you need to move on to the next question. And if you are starting that next question at 10:01, just add the 45 minutes and make sure you don't go beyond the 45 minutes. By doing this kind of planning, you actually ensure that you do not spend unnecessarily too much time on any single question. And so your time is equally spread across all the questions, giving you an opportunity to attempt every other question. It is very sad if you are a candidate in the exam and you discover you have run out of time. It is time up and you have not touched a particular question, not even writing the first word as part of your answer. You feel so guilty. So you avoid that kind of a thing by making sure you don't go beyond the allocated time as you are attempting the questions. Very, very important in the exam. Okay? And start with the easiest questions and end with the most difficult questions. That will also help you to spread your time across all the questions equally instead of spending all the time on the same questions. Candidates need to prepare themselves for this particular exam if they are to improve their performance. I want to also look at some of the questions that came in the June 2019 exam. For instance, question 1, it required you to prepare consolidated financial statements. That was part A. Then part B wanted you to identify alternative methods for measuring NCI and to explain those different methods of measuring NCI. One very important thing that I need to remind candidates, any group financial statements should be very easy to prepare. At this level, it is almost obvious that one particular entity will be a parent, the other will be a subsidiary, and sometimes you have one which is an associate. If you understand the meaning of subsidiary, you also understand accounting treatment, which the standard says, full consolidation or acquisition accounting. And what does acquisition accounting mean? You add all the assets of the two entities, regardless of the percentage of ownership, line by line. Add them up if you are in the statement of financial position. If it is the statement of profit or loss, add line by line all the incomes and expenses. I wish to encourage candidates that don't use the approach of totaling your numbers on the calculator and then only pushing in your answer the totals. It is very dangerous for this particular topic. May you use the approach of putting the brackets in your financial statements and then adding, if it is assets, liabilities, put the asset of the parent, add to the assets of the subsidiary. You know that associates are not supposed to be aggregated. By doing so, it is very possible for you to attain a good number of marks even before you bring adjustments to this question in place. You can achieve a good number of marks by simply adding the assets and liabilities of the parent and the subsidiary in brackets. Okay? A few adjustments will follow, and these adjustments may mean certain assets have to be increased or decreased by the adjustment. And you can do that after you have already put the obvious assets. Whatever assets and liabilities appear in the question for the parent and for the subsidiary, they form part and parcel of your answer. Even where you are not sure what to do with any adjustment, you would have achieved a good amount of marks by simply putting those assets and liabilities in brackets or incomes and expenses in brackets if you are dealing with profit and loss. So that is very important guidance that I'm giving you. Make sure you use that approach. Don't total up on your calculator and simply put the total down. No, it is dangerous because the examiner will not know the composition of the total you are deriving from the calculator to your answer sheet. The examiner doesn't know the composition, and so we will not assume the composition to give you marks and you lose out. So that is on question 1. On question 2, which is single entity company accounts. The single entity company accounts question requires you to incorporate international accounting standards, which come in form of adjustments. And in this particular June 2019 question paper, I will make reference to 3 adjusting notes. The first one talked about, this particular entity was also selling goods on behalf of another entity, was acting as an agent. So how well do you know about accounting for agency kind of transaction? So when an entity is acting as an agent, the sales they make on behalf of another entity, are they supposed to be part of their revenue? So it takes us back to the fact that you need to have a good knowledge of individual accounting standards. In this case, how well do you understand your IFRS 15? If you do, you have thoroughly gone through this particular standard, you will realize that when an entity sells goods on behalf of another, that is not supposed to be part of their revenue. It is supposed to be excluded from their revenue. The only benefit they get from acting as an agent is the commission that they are entitled to. So remove the cost part of the goods from the revenue, from the cost of sales, and only incorporate the commission as part and parcel of their revenue. That is what needed to be done. The next note that I can make reference to from the June 2019 question paper is actually on the convertible bond. This entity had in issue a convertible bond. So from this convertible bond, and this is one area where candidates have a serious challenge to arrive at the figures they are supposed to incorporate in the financial statements. You need to know how to split the convertible bond into the equity and liability components. When they are split, the other thing you need to understand is that the liability that you arrive at when you do the splitting, that is the liability on the date of issue and not at any other date. When you obtain that liability, it is supposed to be subjected to amortization. So depending on the date of issue and the date of reporting, this is where I think a lot of candidates, they lose it out completely. They will not pay attention to when the bond was issued and which liability at which date should be taken to the financial statements. So like in this June 2019 question paper, the bond was issued on 1st April 2018. The reporting date was 31st March 2019. So it was a year down the line that we needed to derive which figures to take to the financial statement. So meaning get the liability portion after splitting the bond, subject it to amortization, then the liability you get at the end of just 1 year, that needed to be the liability that was to be recognized for the year ending 31st March 2019. So many times people are not very sure which year figures to take, as well as the finance cost that should have been taken. The equity option does not change, does not get remeasured, and so it needed to be recognized the same way it came out on the date of issue. Okay? Another very challenging area in this particular single entity company accounts question is the area of taxes. So there will be 2 types of taxes that are incorporated usually in the question: the current tax and the deferred tax. So what it is your opening opening trial balance would have given you what balances of taxes are there at the beginning of an accounting period. In additional information, you will be told how much needs to be provided for as current tax, and you will be given either a deferred tax figure, or you may be given the taxable temporary differences on which you are supposed to apply the income tax rate applicable to this entity for you to arrive at the deferred tax liability. Now, the movement in the deferred tax is what will go to the profit and loss, provided no portion has been stated that it should relate to the revaluation surplus. Then all of it goes to the profit and loss. The same thing, the movement in current tax will go to the profit and loss. And this movement depends whether we had a debit balance at the beginning for current tax or a credit balance. So if we had a debit balance, which is an under provision in the previous year, it will increase how much will be charged to the profit and loss this year. If we had the credit balance brought forward, which is an over provision in the previous year, it will reduce how much is supposed to be charged to the profit and loss in the current year. So that is one area where a lot of candidates really struggle. Can you make sure, because you will never, as far as I can remember, you will never have a question on single entity company accounts that does not have current tax, deferred tax related matter. It will always be there. The IS-16, PPE, revaluations. Pay attention the date the revaluation is taking place. Is it at the beginning of the year or at the end? The moment you mistake the at the beginning for at the end or at the end for at the beginning, you will get all your figures wrong. So pay attention to the dates that are provided. If revaluation is at the beginning, compare just the carrying amount at the beginning with the revalued amount before you depreciate. If the revaluation is taking place at the end, get your revalued amount, compare with the carrying amount that you get after depreciating the asset. If it is a depreciating asset, that way you'll be able to actually get your figures right and improve your performance on this particular question, which is single entity company accounts that tend to give people a lot of problems, and record is there, the performance has been very, very poor. So if you want to improve your performance on this area, make sure before an exam, get 6 questions, even 7 questions, just a single entity company account. Attempt them and make sure that you are comfortable, you reach comfortability level before you can put down those questions. Don't spend all your time on the questions that are easiest to you. Like cash flows are very easy to everyone. So don't spend all your preparation for the exam time doing cash flows related questions. The best is for you to spend a lot of time on the most difficult topics, and one of them is the single entity company account. In the same June 2019 exam, there was question 2, which required preparation of statement of profit or loss and statement of financial position. Okay, so this one is the one that we have just talked about what was supposed to be done, and the areas where people usually miss it out on the best way to account for adjustments to these financial statements. Now, question 3 of this particular exam, this one was on cash flow statements, which is one of the easiest, and a lot of marks are actually obtained by students. Only that they make a mistake of misclassifying items. Instead of going under financing activities, they go to investing activities. Otherwise, generally, cash flows do not pose any challenge. Maybe I talk about another question that came in this exam. This was question 5. Question 5 was on IS 40, investment properties. conceptual framework and IAS 23. Okay? Just to highlight what was needed to be done on the IAS 40 related question. The candidates were required to calculate the carrying amounts at a given date after there was change in accounting for the investment property along the way from the fair value model to the cost model. So you need to grasp the principles in IAS 40 that say that at date of change, you need to actually check whether there is a fair value gain or loss. And this fair value gain or loss should be treated according to the previous accounting method. So if it's fair value, meaning it goes as a profit or loss in the profit and the loss statement, then whatever the fair value on the date of change should actually be used as though it's a cost now and then depreciated over the remaining period. Such simple principles. That's what you need to grasp and then apply and compute your figures given the specific scenario and numbers in the question. On the conceptual framework, in this particular exam, you were required to briefly explain 4 of the qualitative characteristics of financial information. Like I mentioned earlier, if at all you get a question on conceptual framework, it will usually be a very easy question. Very easy. And people get a lot of marks from this particular area, unlike the International Accounting Standards component. So can you make sure you don't spare any question from conceptual framework? Very easy. So if you know the marks are 8 and you are required to explain 4, you know that you are entitled to 2 marks per qualitative characteristic that you correctly explain. On the IAS 23, you were being tested on your understanding of this particular standard, where the examiner wanted to find out from you the conditions that should be satisfied for borrowing costs to be capitalized. So if you have read through IAS 23 borrowing costs, you will never have a challenge on such kind of a question. It is something that will easily come, you know, and you put your points down. The other part of the question wanted to find out from the candidates, you know, under what circumstances investment income will actually qualify to reduce the borrowing costs eligible for capitalization. And so you can only provide the answers to such kind of a question if you have had time to sit down with IAS 23, read it and understand, and use a few of numbers to actually compute what is required. Okay? Other non-exam related issues that you need to take into account. So I'm bringing you these points in my conclusion because they are very important. Okay? Non-exam related, but you need to take into account as you prepare for the exam. So a few hours before the exam, avoid taking caffeinated foodstuffs. Don't take a lot of coffee because you want to break the night so that you study the whole night while you write the exam at 9. It has a problem of, you know, making you feel so tired during the time you're writing the exam. Your concentration will be disturbed. Okay? If your concentration is disturbed because you have been awake for too long a time, even the simplest question you will fail to answer. So avoid caffeinated foods few hours before the exam. If anything, what I'm telling you is the opposite of what people do. You don't have to break the night. You need to have enough sleep before the exam. Sleep like a baby. When you wake up, you are very fresh, energetic. You go to the exam room, you will have all the concentration that you require. I know there's that feeling to say, hey, if I sleep, I've not gone through this, I've not gone through this, I need to go through this. But that is just putting unnecessary pressure on yourself and you get tired and you fail to concentrate in the exam. Avoid the groups of people that speak negative about that particular exam, because they'll convince you that yes, this exam is very difficult. So few hours, just be there alone in isolation and just concentrate on, okay, if a question comes on this topic, how will I attempt it? Don't pay attention to those negative talks. If you can have a mentor that you need to speak to advise you, do that. Okay? So we have come to the conclusion of this particular presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to contact the Zambia Institute of Chartered Accountants. You will definitely get all the necessary help that you require. Thank you.